The morning sun stretched across Fort Westbrook Military Base as Sophia Reyes adjusted the security badge clipped to her tactical vest. At 34, she had learned that first impressions were rarely accurate, but she also knew most people never looked beyond them. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform bore the insignia of a civilian security consultant that marked her as just another contractor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. All personnel, maintain distance from the restricted zone, barked Chief Security Officer Marcus Blackwell, his voice slicing through the morning air. Civilian consultants should remain with their escorts at all times. Sophia stepped back without argument, observing as a convoy of armored vehicles rolled through the checkpoint. Around her, other security personnel exchanged knowing glances and suppressed smiles. Another civilian expert who didn't understand military protocol, their expressions seemed to say. Another outsider who thought analyzing security threats was the same as watching action movies. She had arrived at Fort Westbrook 4 months ago through a Department of Defense contractor program. Her credentials listed her as an experienced security analyst with specializations in counterterrorism and threat assessment. What the paperwork didn't mention was the reason she had left her previous position with a prestigious private security firm, or why someone with her qualifications was willing to take a mid-level consultant position at a base where most other civilian contractors were fresh out of criminal justice programs. Sophia had chosen discretion from day one. She didn't talk about previous operations or request access to classified briefings for quote, 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 quote. She didn't share war stories or try to impress the younger officers with tales of high-profile security details or dangerous assignments. Instead, she arrived early, methodically reviewed surveillance footage, and stayed late to manually log every minor anomaly in perimeter security and personnel movements. The other security staff had quickly labeled her as overly suspicious, perhaps even paranoid. While they relied on automated security systems and rushed through routine checks to meet tight schedules, Sophia would spend extra time examining camera angles that showed nothing unusual, checking fence sections that appeared intact, and maintaining detailed handwritten logs that went far beyond what regulations required. "You sure you're not seeing shadows where there aren't any?" asked Jordan Mitchell, one of the younger security analysts, as he watched Sophia carefully inspect surveillance footage that had been marked as routine. "The AI detection system says there's no unauthorized movement." Sophia looked up from her monitor, her hands still poised over the keyboard. "AI systems are excellent at recognizing patterns they're programmed to detect," she said quietly. "They're not so good at catching the things that don't fit expected parameters." Chief Security Officer Blackwell, who oversaw the civilian security contracts, seemed to take particular pleasure in reminding Sophia of her place in the hierarchy. During briefings, he would assign her the most mundane analysis tasks, while giving the more interesting threat assessments to analysts with half her experience. When she tried to offer input on security vulnerabilities, he would cut her off with a dismissive gesture. "Leave the complex threat analysis to the people who understand military security," he would say, his tone suggesting that civilian contractors were barely qualified to monitor security cameras and check IDs. The other officers followed Blackwell's lead, treating Sophia as a temporary inconvenience rather than a valuable team member. They made jokes about her methodical approach, calling her paranoid Patty, and suggesting she was trying too hard to impress people who already knew she wasn't cut out for high-stakes military security work. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But there were moments when Sophia's careful attention to detail revealed itself as something more than paranoia. Late one evening, as the night shift was preparing for a routine patrol, she noticed something wrong with the movement pattern of a maintenance vehicle near the communications building. The vehicle had passed all checkpoint verifications, but something about the timing of its movements seemed off to her. She approached the duty officer, a young lieutenant named David Miller, and spoke quietly so as not to create a scene. "Sir, that maintenance vehicle has circled the communications building 3 times in the past hour. Standard procedure is 1 inspection per shift. You might want to verify their work order again." Lieutenant Miller looked at her with surprise. "How do you know that? Have you been tracking all vehicle movements?" Sophia's expression remained neutral, but for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. "Just a pattern I noticed in the routine footage." "Better safe than sorry." The lieutenant radioed for additional verification of the maintenance crew's orders. When the vehicle was stopped and searched, they discovered unauthorized scanning equipment hidden beneath legitimate maintenance tools. The driver had proper credentials, but they were sophisticated forgeries that had fooled the automated system. Lieutenant Miller completed the security incident report without further incident, but when he returned to the security center, he sought out Sophia at her monitoring station. "You were right," he told her. "They had equipment for intercepting secure communications. How did you spot that vehicle when none of our automated systems flagged it?" But Sophia had already turned back to her work, and the moment passed without an answer. The next morning brought an inspection team from the Department of Defense, and Chief Security Officer Blackwell was determined to show off his efficient operation. He assigned Sophia to basic monitoring duties, keeping her well away from any technical discussions or security demonstrations. "Stick to what you know," he told her in front of the visiting officials. "Leave the real security analysis to the professionals." As Sophia gathered her notes at the monitoring station, a gust of air conditioning caused her jacket to flutter open for just a moment. On the inside pocket, barely visible beneath the fabric, was a patch that most people wouldn't have recognized. But the visiting security chief, a retired colonel named Richard Simmons, happened to glance over at exactly the right moment. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. The patch was dark blue with a silver falcon and red shield. Hand-stitched below the falcon were the letters that made Colonel Simmons set his cup down with shaking hands. Task Force Sentinel. The conversation in the security center seemed to slow down as if the air itself had grown thicker. Several of the older security personnel had noticed the patch as well, and a strange tension settled over the group. It was the kind of silence that comes when someone realizes they've been making assumptions that might have been very, very wrong. Sophia caught the reaction and quickly adjusted her jacket, covering the patch completely. But it was too late. The damage, if it could be called that, had been done. Colonel Simmons approached her slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Reyes," he said quietly, "might I have a word with you privately?" Sophia nodded, following him to a corner of the security center where their conversation wouldn't be overheard. Simmons looked at her for a long moment, his experienced eyes taking in details that the younger officers had missed. The way she scanned rooms automatically for exits and vantage points. The way her hands positioned themselves for a quick reaction even during casual conversation. The way she listened to radio chatter with the focused attention of someone who had learned to trust her life to those communications. "Task Force Sentinel," Simmons said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That unit was dissolved 5 years ago." Sophia's expression didn't change, but Simmons caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Yes, sir. It was. The records are still classified, but word gets around in our community. There was an operative assigned to that unit. Code name Night Watch. Female operative who disappeared from service records after an operation went bad in Eastern Europe." Sophia was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the security monitors across the room. Finally, she spoke. "Sometimes people don't disappear, Colonel. Sometimes they just land in a different place than they expected." Simmons nodded slowly, understanding more than Sophia had actually said. "Ms. Reyes, I don't know what brought you here, and I respect that some stories aren't meant to be told, but I want you to know that if you ever need someone who understands the weight of carrying certain patches, you know where to find me." As Sophia returned to her work, she could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. Word would spread. She knew it always did in military communities. But she also knew that respect earned through rumors was different from respect earned through actions. And she had learned through painful experience that actions spoke louder than any patch ever could. That night, as she walked alone across the base toward her quarters, Sophia pulled out a worn medallion from her jacket pocket. The edges were weathered, and the inscription read simply, "In shadows, still serve." She had carried that medallion for 5 years through sleepless nights and career changes and the long process of learning how to live with decisions that couldn't be undone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that her quiet vigilance was more than just paranoia. But tonight she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be trusted with operations that required absolute precision and judgment. The patch on her jacket wasn't a trophy or a conversation starter. It was a reminder of promises made and kept, and of the responsibility that came with knowledge earned through experience that most people would never understand. Sophia Reyes had once been night watch, but that was a different life. Now she was simply a security consultant who happened to know more about threats than her paperwork suggested. And for now, that was enough. The morning briefing room hummed with the usual pre-shift energy as security personnel reviewed incident reports and patrol assignments. Sophia sat in the back corner, her security assessment spread across a small table, but her attention was focused on the personnel rotation data being displayed on the main screen. The pattern of shift changes made her frown slightly. Chief Security Officer Blackwell stood at the front of the room outlining the day's security objectives. "We'll have 2 VIP groups touring the research facilities in the eastern sector," he announced. "Security protocols are standard, visibility optimal, no significant threats anticipated." Sophia studied the visitor logs more carefully. The data showed 3 separate contractor groups scheduled to access different parts of the facility within the same 2-hour window, combined with an unusual number of delivery vehicles cleared for the same time frame. She had seen similar patterns before, and they had a tendency to create security blind spots that could be exploited. After the briefing concluded and personnel began filing out, Sophia approached the operations desk where Blackwell was reviewing security assignments. "Sir," she said respectfully, "I noticed some unusual convergence in the eastern sector visitor schedules that might create monitoring challenges." "Ms. Reyes," Blackwell interrupted, not looking up from his paperwork. "Your job is to monitor the security feeds, not to second-guess our scheduling team." "I understand, sir, but these specific scheduling overlaps can create blind spots in coverage that might not show up in standard security. Are you questioning the competence of our operations officers?" Blackwell's voice had taken on an edge that made several nearby personnel look up from their work. Sophia kept her tone level and professional. "No, sir. I'm simply suggesting that based on experience with similar convergence patterns, it might be worth having additional personnel stationed at these specific junction points." Blackwell finally looked up, his expression clearly annoyed. "Ms. Reyes, I'm going to make something very clear. You are a civilian security contractor. You are not a tactical officer. You are not a threat assessment specialist. And you are certainly not qualified to make recommendations about base security operations. Your job is to monitor feeds and fill out incident reports. Leave the security planning to the people who actually know what they're doing." The conversation had grown loud enough to attract attention from other personnel in the operations center. Sophia could feel eyes on her, some curious, others embarrassed by the public dressing down. She nodded quietly and returned to her assessment. But the dismissal stung more than she cared to admit. Lieutenant Miller, who had witnessed the exchange, approached her table a few minutes later. "Don't let Blackwell get to you," he said quietly. "He's been passed over for promotion twice, and he takes it out on anyone he thinks might be showing him up." "I wasn't trying to show anyone up," Sophia replied, still studying the scheduling data. "I just wanted to make sure all vulnerabilities are covered." Miller sat down across from her, lowering his voice. "Look, I don't know what your background is, but that tip you gave me last week about the maintenance vehicle was spot on. Where did you really learn to read security patterns like that?" Sophia glanced up, meeting his eyes briefly before returning to her paperwork. "Experience," she said simply. "Sometimes expensive experience." Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Sophia would identify potential vulnerabilities or suggest procedural modifications based on her observations, and Blackwell would systematically shut her down. When she recommended additional verification protocols for contractors operating in sensitive areas, he assigned her to entrance duty instead. When she suggested modifications to the patrol routes based on blind spot patterns she had noticed, he told her that military security procedures didn't need input from civilian contractors. The other security staff began to distance themselves from Sophia, not wanting to be associated with someone who seemed to constantly clash with leadership. Jordan Mitchell, who had initially been friendly, started avoiding her during breaks. "Look, Reyes," he said one afternoon when she tried to discuss a perimeter monitoring anomaly she had discovered. Maybe you should just focus on doing your job the way they want it done. All this extra analysis isn't helping your reputation around here. But Sophia couldn't simply ignore what she saw. Her training and experience had taught her that small vulnerabilities became big security breaches when they were overlooked. And big security breaches meant people got hurt or worse. She continued her detailed monitoring and maintained her comprehensive logs even as it became clear that her thoroughness was being viewed as insubordination. The breaking point came during a routine security verification of the base's restricted research facility. Sophia was examining the access logs when she noticed something troubling. The biometric verification system showed normal authentication patterns, but there was a slight irregularity in the timing of certain personnel movements that could indicate credential sharing or unauthorized access. She documented her findings and submitted a security concern report to flag the accounts for additional monitoring. The paperwork made its way up the chain of command and landed on Blackwell's desk just as he was preparing for a high-visibility security demonstration for visiting congressional representatives. Blackwell stormed into the monitoring center clutching Sophia's report. "What is this nonsense about compromised credentials?" he demanded. "Do you have any idea what kind of embarrassment it would cause to lock down access to the research facility based on paranoid speculation from a civilian contractor?" Sophia stood her ground, though her voice remained calm. "Sir, the access pattern shows clear anomalies in the timing sequence. With the security demonstration scheduled tomorrow, it could provide cover for—" "Enough!" Blackwell's voice echoed through the security center. "I've had it with your constant doom and gloom predictions. You're not here to make policy decisions or flag personnel based on your amateur analysis." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that only Sophia could hear. "Let me make something very clear, Ms. Reyes. Your contract is up for review next month. If you want to keep this job, you'll limit your activities to basic monitoring tasks and keep your opinions about security operations to yourself. Are we understood?" Sophia felt the familiar weight of being in an impossible position. She could back down, keep quiet, and potentially watch someone get hurt by a vulnerability she had identified. Or she could continue to speak up and risk losing her job, along with any chance of helping prevent a potential security breach. "I understand your position, sir," she said finally, "but I have a responsibility to report security concerns regardless of the consequences to my employment." Blackwell's face flushed red. "Your responsibility is to do what I tell you to do. Nothing more, nothing less." As he walked away, Sophia heard him muttering to his assistant about problem civilians who don't understand their place. The message was clear. She was being marked as a troublemaker, someone whose contract would not be renewed. That evening, as Sophia sat in her quarters reviewing security protocols, she thought about the decision she was facing. She had built a new life here, quiet and stable, away from the high-stakes world that had cost her so much 5 years ago. But she was being forced to choose between keeping that life and staying true to the principles that had guided her through much darker times. She pulled out her worn medallion and turned it over in her hands. "In shadows still serve," she read for the 1,000th time. The phrase had multiple meanings, but at its core, it was about finding a way to protect people even when normal support systems had failed. Sophia had learned to land in shadows before. Now she was going to have to learn how to fight without authority, how to protect people who didn't even know they needed protection, and how to do it all while maintaining the quiet professionalism that had become her trademark. The patch on her jacket represented more than just her past. It represented a commitment to protecting the innocent, regardless of the personal cost. And some commitments, she had learned, were worth keeping, even when the lights went out. The security demonstration was scheduled for Thursday morning, with 3 congressional representatives and a defense contractor delegation observing base operations. Chief Security Officer Blackwell had spent the better part of the week ensuring that everything would run flawlessly, from the timing of patrol demonstrations to the refreshments for the VIP observation area. Sophia had spent the same week quietly documenting every instance of the access anomalies she had identified. The irregular timing patterns were creating 30-second windows where security cameras were aligned away from key access points, barely noticeable during routine operations, but potentially catastrophic if exploited by someone with malicious intent. She had recorded 12 separate instances over 4 days, each one occurring when certain contractors accessed the research facility at specific times. On Wednesday evening, she submitted her final report through official channels, complete with detailed timestamps, access logs, and her professional recommendation to temporarily lock down the affected credentials until the pattern could be properly investigated. The security measure would take less than 2 hours and impact only 3 contractor accounts. The response came back within an hour, stamped with Blackwell's signature. Security alert dismissed. All access credentials cleared for continued operation. Sophia stared at the rejection notice, feeling a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She had been in similar situations before, times when she knew something was wrong, but couldn't convince decision-makers to take action. 5 years ago, that kind of institutional failure had cost lives. She wasn't going to let it happen again. Thursday morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for outdoor demonstrations according to the event planning reports. The VIPs arrived in a motorcade of black SUVs, their security details spreading out across the courtyard as photographers documented their tour of the base facilities. Sophia was assigned to basic monitoring duties, keeping her well away from the demonstration area and any interaction with the visiting dignitaries. She watched from the security center as Blackwell proudly explained the sophisticated security measures to the congressional delegation, his voice carrying through the radio as he described the advanced biometric systems and AI-powered threat detection. "This facility represents the cutting edge of military security technology," Blackwell declared, gesturing toward the research building. "Every system has been thoroughly tested and certified to the highest standards of protection and reliability." Sophia felt sick. She knew that at least one of those systems had documented vulnerabilities that could prove disastrous under the right circumstances. But she also knew that speaking up now in front of the VIPs and media representatives would be viewed as an act of sabotage against the entire base. Lieutenant Miller was assigned to lead the security escort for the demonstration, a routine walkthrough that would showcase the base's layered security approach and advanced systems. As he checked his equipment at the security center, Sophia caught his eye and gave him a subtle signal to meet her away from the main group. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, "I need you to know that there's a potential security vulnerability with the research facility access. If you notice any contractors entering the East Wing during the demonstration, particularly if they're not part of the scheduled tour group, maintain visual contact and verify their credentials personally." Miller frowned. "What kind of vulnerability? This wasn't mentioned in the briefing." "It's documented in the security logs, but the alert has been dismissed despite the anomaly. Just promise me you'll be extra vigilant about anyone accessing that area, especially if they're using contractor credentials during the demonstration." Before Miller could respond, Blackwell's voice boomed across the radio. "Lieutenant Miller, we're ready for your team to escort the VIP group." As Miller walked away, Sophia saw him glance back with a troubled expression. She knew she had put him in an impossible position, giving him information that contradicted his official briefing while expecting him to maintain normal protocols with congressional representatives watching. The demonstration proceeded normally for the first 30 minutes. The security team executed a series of precise protocols, demonstrating the base's readiness and response capabilities, while maintaining constant communication with the command center. The VIPs nodded approvingly as Blackwell provided commentary on the technical sophistication of American military security systems. Then, as the tour approached the research facility for the final phase of the demonstration, Sophia's worst fears materialized. "Command, this is Miller. We have an unauthorized access alert at Research East, rear entrance. System shows valid credentials but no scheduled access for this time window." Miller's voice crackled over the radio. In the VIP observation area, conversation stopped as the delegation turned their attention to the security response unfolding before them. Blackwell's confident smile faltered as he realized that his carefully choreographed demonstration was about to become a public relations nightmare. "Miller, command copies your alert. Security Team Bravo, please respond to Research East for credential verification. Maintain normal protocols," the command center controller responded, his voice professionally calm despite the obvious concern. Sophia watched the situation unfold with growing dread. She knew that the normal response protocols would be too slow to intercept whoever was exploiting the security gap she had identified. By the time Team Bravo arrived, the intruders would have at least 3 minutes of unmonitored access to highly sensitive research. "Command, Miller. I've got 3 individuals entering the secure server room. Credentials are verified in the system, but don't match the physical description of authorized personnel, requesting immediate lockdown. The congressional delegation was now actively paying attention to the security response, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine concern. Blackwell was sweating despite the cool morning air, his careful demonstration dissolving into the kind of security breach that would generate investigations and uncomfortable questions about access protocols. Sophia made a decision that she knew would end her career at Fort Westbrook. She activated the emergency override protocol, a measure reserved for imminent threats that would immediately lock down the entire research facility. Alarms blared across the base as automatic security doors sealed and emergency response teams mobilized. She walked directly to the command center microphone, overriding the normal communication channels despite the security personnel who moved to stop her. All security teams, this is Sophia Reyes. The individuals in the server room are using cloned credentials. They've been exploiting a timing vulnerability in the camera system for the past week. Standard verification protocols will not identify them. They have all the correct digital signatures. Response teams need to consider them armed and dangerous. Blackwell spun around, his face flushing red with anger and embarrassment. Ms. Reyes, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. You have no authority to initiate emergency protocols or, I documented 12 instances of this exact access pattern over the past week, Sophia continued, speaking directly to the ranking congressional representative. I submitted a security alert to temporarily lock down the affected credentials until the vulnerability could be investigated. That request was denied by Chief Security Officer Blackwell. The silence that followed was deafening. Security personnel looked uncertainly between Sophia and Blackwell, unsure whether to remove her or listen to what she had to say. The congressional delegation exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the implications of what they had just heard. Blackwell's voice was barely controlled as he addressed Sophia. You are relieved of duty effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. But the ranking congressman, a man named Senator William Porter, who served on the Senate Intelligence Committee, held up his hand. Actually, I think we need to hear what this woman has to say. If she identified a security threat that was ignored, that's exactly the kind of problem we're here to investigate. Sophia pulled out her documentation folder, the one she had prepared in case this moment came. The access system has a timing vulnerability that creates a brief window where unauthorized users can enter without being properly monitored. The intruders are currently exploiting that exact vulnerability. Miller's voice came over the radio again, more tense now. Command, we've intercepted 3 individuals in the server room. They were installing data extraction devices on the secure network. 1 is in custody, 2 are attempting to escape through the maintenance tunnels. The command center's response was swift and professional. All units, we have unauthorized intruders in the maintenance tunnel system. Full base lockdown initiated. Response teams converge on all tunnel exits. Sophia stepped forward, addressing the security controller directly. Sir, based on the infiltration pattern I've documented, they'll have prepared an alternative exit route. Redirect teams to the northeast perimeter where the tunnel system runs closest to the fence line. Blackwell exploded. You are not authorized to provide tactical guidance. You're a monitoring contractor, not a security commander. But Senator Porter was now actively interested. What's your background, Ms. Reyes? How do you know about infiltration patterns and escape routes? Sophia met his gaze steadily. I have experience with counterintelligence operations in hostile environments, sir. Experience that tells me these intruders planned this breach carefully and will have multiple escape options prepared. The security controller looked between Blackwell and Sophia, clearly caught between protocol and practical necessity. Finally, he made his decision. Team Alpha, redirect to northeast perimeter, Section 12. Set up containment perimeter, and prepare for possible fence breach. Miller's voice came back, calmer now. Command, that's a good call. We found evidence they've been preparing an escape route exactly where Ms. Reyes indicated. As the drama played out over the radio, Sophia knew that she had crossed a line from which there would be no return. She had publicly contradicted her commanding officer in front of congressional representatives, revealed security vulnerabilities that had been officially deemed non-critical, and essentially accused the base leadership of ignoring legitimate threats for the sake of appearances. Blackwell stepped close to her, his voice a whisper filled with venom. You've just ended your career, Reyes, not just here but anywhere in military security. I'll make sure you never work on another government facility as long as I have any influence." Sophia looked back at him calmly, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the hidden patch on her jacket. "Some things are more important than careers, Chief, like making sure innocent people stay safe." The security response proceeded with precise efficiency, the training and professionalism of the base personnel overcoming the initial confusion. All 3 intruders were captured before they could escape the base perimeter. Initial investigation revealed sophisticated espionage equipment and evidence of a weeks-long operation to infiltrate the research facility's secure network. But Sophia knew that the real battle was just beginning. She had chosen to fight back against institutional negligence, and now she would have to live with the consequences of that decision. As security personnel finally moved to escort her from the command center, she heard Senator Porter telling his aide to schedule meetings with the base commander and the Security Review Board. The investigation that Blackwell had feared was now inevitable, and Sophia's documentation would be at the center of it. She had learned 5 years ago that sometimes the most important victories came at the highest personal cost. Now she was about to find out if that lesson still applied. The base detention center was a sterile room with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Sophia sat across a metal table from Captain Jennifer Hayes, the military intelligence officer assigned to handle what was being officially termed a, quote, security protocol incident. Her personal effects had been confiscated, including her documentation folder, security logs, and the worn medallion she always carried. "Ms. Reyes," Captain Hayes began, her tone professionally neutral. "You understand that your actions during the congressional demonstration constitute a serious breach of protocol? Chief Security Officer Blackwell has filed formal charges against you for insubordination, interference with security operations, and unauthorized activation of emergency protocols." Sophia nodded calmly. "I understand the charges, ma'am. I also understand that 3 foreign intelligence operatives were captured because someone was willing to speak up about a documented security vulnerability." Captain Hayes made notes in her file. "Your contract includes specific clauses about chain of command and proper channels for reporting concerns. Why didn't you follow those procedures?" "I did follow those procedures," Sophia replied. "I submitted 12 separate security reports documenting the access vulnerability. I provided detailed analysis of the exploitation pattern. I recommended temporarily locking down the affected credentials until the vulnerability could be investigated. Every one of those reports was reviewed and denied by Chief Security Officer Blackwell." The intelligence officer looked up from her notes. "Do you have copies of those reports?" Sophia shook her head. "All my documentation was in the folder that was confiscated, but the security database should have digital copies of every submission." What Sophia didn't mention was that she had learned long ago to keep backup copies of important documents. Hidden in her quarters was a complete duplicate set of her analysis, along with timestamps and access logs that painted a clear picture of the vulnerability's progressive exploitation pattern. After 2 hours of questioning, Sophia was released to her quarters but restricted from accessing any security areas, effectively suspended from her duties while the base conducted its review. As she walked back to her quarters, she could feel the stares and whispered conversations of other personnel who had heard about the morning's events. That evening, she received an unexpected visitor. Colonel Simmons knocked on her door just after sunset, looking around carefully before entering her small apartment. "Ms. Reyes," he said quietly, "I wanted you to know that there are some people on this base who think you did the right thing today." Sophia poured coffee for both of them, grateful for the first friendly conversation she'd had all day. "I'm not so sure about that, Colonel. I may have just made the situation worse for everyone." Simmons shook his head. "I've been in military security for 30 years, and I've seen what happens when threats get buried under politics and careers. You may have prevented a major intelligence breach today, and probably stopped a much bigger operation that was just getting started." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There are things you need to know about Chief Blackwell. He's been covering up security concerns for months, pressuring contractors and junior officers to sign off on protocols that should have been flagged for review." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of concerns? Access anomalies, perimeter vulnerabilities, communication security issues. Nothing that would cause an immediate breach, but the kind of things that add up over time. Blackwell's been more concerned with maintaining security performance statistics than actually securing the base. Simmons pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. I've been keeping my own records documenting the pressure he's been putting on security staff. Several officers have come to me privately concerned about being forced to approve protocols that they weren't comfortable with. Sophia studied the notebook, recognizing a pattern of systematic security shortcuts and corner cutting that went far beyond the access vulnerability she had identified. Why haven't you reported this up the chain of command? I've tried, Simmons replied grimly. Blackwell has cultivated relationships with the right people at the regional level. My concerns get filed away or dismissed as the complaints of an old-timer who doesn't understand modern security efficiency standards. He looked directly at Sophia, his expression serious. But now you've forced their hand. Congressional representatives witnessed a security breach, and they're going to want answers. The investigation won't be able to ignore evidence if it's properly documented and presented. Sophia realized that she had stumbled into something much larger than a single access vulnerability. Blackwell wasn't just an incompetent officer making bad decisions. He was systematically compromising base security to advance his career, gambling with national security to maintain statistics that would look good in performance reviews. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Simmons smiled grimly. "I need someone with your technical expertise to help me document everything properly. Someone who knows how to analyze intrusion patterns and present evidence in a way that can't be dismissed or buried." Over the next few days, Sophia and Simmons worked carefully to compile a comprehensive case file. Using her backup documentation and Simmons's security logs, they created a timeline that showed Blackwell's pattern of pressuring staff to approve questionable protocols, his systematic denial of legitimate security concerns, and his willingness to risk breaches for the sake of performance statistics. Lieutenant Miller sought out Sophia on her third day of suspension, finding her in the base library where she was researching military security regulations and threat assessment protocols. "I wanted to thank you," he said, sitting down across from her at a secluded table. "Those intruders had access to our most sensitive research data. If they hadn't been caught during the actual infiltration, we might never have known they were there." Sophia looked up from the regulation manual she was studying. "I'm just glad no one was hurt, Lieutenant. That's what matters." Miller leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's something else you should know. I've been having concerns about security protocols for months. Minor issues that I reported but never seemed to get properly addressed. After what happened yesterday, I started talking to other officers. We're all experiencing similar problems." He pulled out a folded paper from his uniform pocket. "I made a list of every security anomaly I've encountered in the past 6 months. Access timing issues, perimeter monitoring glitches, credential verification failures. Individually, none of them were serious enough to trigger a major review, but taken together, they paint a picture of systematic security vulnerabilities." Sophia studied the list, recognizing several issues that corresponded to security concerns she had submitted and seen denied. "Have you shared this with the investigation team?" she asked. "Not yet," Miller replied. "I wanted to talk to you first. Blackwell has already been spreading word that you're a disgruntled contractor trying to create problems to avoid being fired. Some of the younger officers are buying into that narrative." Sophia wasn't surprised by Blackwell's strategy. Discrediting her character and motives was easier than addressing the technical issues she had raised. But she also knew that character assassination only worked if the evidence couldn't stand on its own. "Lieutenant," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you trust my technical judgment based on your experience working with me?" Miller didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. You've been right about every security issue you flagged. More right than some people with a lot more authority and higher clearance levels." Sophia made a decision that would determine how the rest of the investigation played out. "Then I'm going to share something with you that might help protect this base, but it's going to require you to trust me completely." She told Miller about Simmons's documentation of the broader security problems, about the pattern of safety shortcuts and corner cutting that went far beyond her own concerns. She explained how Blackwell had systematically pressured security staff to approve protocols that should have been flagged, and how congressional oversight might be the only way to force real change. Miller listened with growing concern, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed his own deep understanding of security systems. When Sophia finished, he sat back in his chair with a grim expression. "This is bigger than just security vulnerabilities," he said finally. "This is about the fundamental integrity of our operations. If we can't trust our security protocols, we can't effectively protect what matters." He stood up, his decision made. "I'll testify to the investigation team about every anomaly I've experienced, and I'll encourage other officers to do the same." As Miller left the library, Sophia felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. She had found allies who were willing to speak up, but she also knew that Blackwell wouldn't give up without a fight. The investigation was about to become a battle between competing versions of reality, with the security of a critical military facility hanging in the balance. That night, as she prepared her final documentation package for the formal investigation, Sophia thought about the cost of speaking truth to power. 5 years ago, she had learned that sometimes doing the right thing meant sacrificing everything you had worked to build. Now she was facing that same choice again. But this time, she wasn't alone. The patch on her jacket represented more than her own past. It represented a commitment to protecting others regardless of the personal cost. And sometimes that commitment required more than technical expertise. Sometimes it required courage. The base conference room had been transformed into a formal hearing chamber with recording equipment, stenographer, and a panel of 3 investigating officers from the Department of Defense. Senator Porter had used his influence to ensure that the investigation would be thorough and independent, with representatives from both the Inspector General's office and the Senate Intelligence Committee oversight staff. Sophia sat at the witness table, her backup documentation spread before her in meticulously organized folders. Across the room, Chief Security Officer Blackwell conferred quietly with the base legal officer, occasionally glancing in her direction with barely concealed hostility. General Patricia Winters, the lead investigating officer, called the hearing to order with crisp military precision. This investigation will examine allegations of improper security procedures, protocol violations, and command decision-making regarding base protection at Fort Westbrook Military Base. She looked directly at Sophia. "Ms. Reyes, you are here as both a witness and a subject of investigation. Your actions during the congressional demonstration on Thursday morning constitute a breach of established protocol. However, your allegations regarding security concerns require thorough examination." Sophia stood to acknowledge the general's statement. "Yes, ma'am. I understand my situation, and I'm prepared to provide complete documentation of my concerns." The first phase of questioning focused on Sophia's credentials and background. The investigating panel wanted to establish her technical qualifications before examining her specific allegations about security vulnerabilities. "Ms. Reyes," General Winters began, "your personnel file indicates you have extensive experience in security analysis. There are gaps in your employment history. Can you explain the 5-year period between your previous position with Global Defense Partners and your current contract?" Sophia had anticipated this question and prepared her response carefully. "During that period, I was involved in specialized security operations that are subject to classification restrictions. I can provide the relevant security clearance documentation if required." Colonel James Reynolds, the second panel member, leaned forward. "Are you saying you had previous government experience that isn't reflected in your current contractor status?" "I'm saying that my background includes operational experience with high-level security protocols under challenging conditions. That experience informs my approach to threat assessment and vulnerability identification." Blackwell's lawyer immediately objected. The witness is being deliberately vague about her background, possibly to create false credibility for allegations that lack technical merit. General Winters silenced the objection with a gesture. "We'll establish Ms. Reyes' credibility through examination of her technical analysis, not speculation about her background." The panel spent the next 2 hours reviewing Sophia's documentation of the access vulnerability. Her timestamps of the suspicious entries, logs showing the camera rotation patterns, and detailed analysis of exploitation methods painted a clear picture of a genuine security threat that had been systematically ignored. Major Lisa Zhang, the third panel member, studied the security logs carefully. "Ms. Reyes, you submitted 12 separate reports about this access vulnerability. Can you walk us through Chief Security Officer Blackwell's responses to these reports?" Sophia opened her first folder, revealing printed copies of every security alert and denial. Each report was reviewed and dismissed within 24 hours, usually with notations that the observed anomalies were within acceptable parameters or that system modifications would disrupt normal operations. She pulled out a specific document. However, I also documented that temporary credential review would require less than 2 hours and would impact only 3 contractor accounts, not disrupting overall base operations. Colonel Reynolds examined the denial forms. Mr. Blackwell, these security reports appear to document legitimate vulnerabilities. What was your rationale for dismissing them? Blackwell stood, his posture rigid with military bearing. Sir, Ms. Reyes has a pattern of submitting excessive security alerts based on overly suspicious interpretation of normal system variations. Military facilities are designed to operate within broader tolerance parameters than civilian installations. Sophia quietly pulled out another folder. General Winters, if I may present additional documentation that addresses Chief Blackwell's assertion about normal tolerances. The general nodded, and Sophia spread out comparative analysis charts showing intrusion patterns across multiple facilities and time periods. These charts demonstrate that the access anomalies I documented fall well outside normal operational parameters. Furthermore, I identified similar patterns on 4 other access points that were also denied security review. Major Zhang studied the charts with growing concern. Ms. Reyes, are you saying that multiple access points had similar vulnerabilities? Yes, ma'am. And I can demonstrate that these vulnerabilities are part of a broader pattern of security shortcuts that compromise base protection. Sophia opened her final folder, revealing the comprehensive case file she had compiled with Colonel Simmons. The documentation showed systematic pressure on security staff, denial of legitimate concerns, and manipulation of security performance statistics. The room fell silent as the investigating officers absorbed the scope of the allegations. General Winters looked up from the documents with a grave expression. Ms. Reyes, you're alleging that Chief Blackwell has systematically compromised base security across multiple systems and protocols. This goes far beyond the single access vulnerability that triggered this investigation. Yes, ma'am. The access vulnerability was simply the most dramatic example of an ongoing pattern of prioritizing performance statistics over actual security. Blackwell's composure finally cracked. This is a witch hunt orchestrated by a disgruntled contractor who's about to be fired for incompetence. Ms. Reyes has no command authority, no operational experience, and no understanding of the pressures involved in maintaining modern security operations. Sophia remained calm, but her voice carried an edge of steel that hadn't been there before. Chief Blackwell, you just said I have no operational experience. Would you like to reconsider that statement? Something in her tone made the entire room pay attention. General Winters leaned forward. Ms. Reyes, are you prepared to clarify your operational background for this investigation? Sophia reached into her jacket and carefully revealed the patch on the inside pocket, positioning it so the panel could clearly see the dark blue background, silver falcon, and red shield with the hand-stitched designation, Task Force Sentinel. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. General Winters' eyes widened in recognition. Colonel Reynolds sat back in his chair as if struck, and Major Zhang audibly drew in her breath. Task Force Sentinel, General Winters said quietly. That unit was dissolved 5 years ago after an operation in Eastern Europe. Sophia met the general's gaze steadily. Yes, ma'am. I was the lead counterintelligence operative for that unit. Codename Nightwatch. The revelation completely changed the dynamic in the room. Blackwell's accusations about her lack of operational experience suddenly seemed not just wrong, but absurdly ignorant. The investigating officers were now looking at someone who had conducted counterintelligence operations under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Colonel Reynolds spoke first. Ms. Reyes, or should I say Agent Reyes, your service record from that period is classified, but we're authorized to review it for this investigation. Are you willing to have your Task Force Sentinel service examined as part of establishing your credibility? Quote, Sophia nodded. Yes, sir. I believe my experience with infiltration tactics and counterintelligence operations is directly relevant to the security concerns I've raised. Major Zhang addressed Blackwell directly. Chief, Did you know about Ms. Reyes's background when you were dismissing her security reports? Blackwell's face had gone pale. No, ma'am. Her contractor paperwork made no mention of prior intelligence service or operational qualifications. And if you had known, General Winters continued, would that have changed your response to her security concerns? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Blackwell understood that his answer would determine not just the outcome of this investigation, but the future of his career. I would have given her concerns more thorough consideration, he admitted finally. Sophia felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness at Blackwell's admission. It confirmed what she had suspected, that her concerns had been dismissed not based on their technical merit, but because of assumptions about her background and qualifications. General Winters called for a recess to allow the panel to review Sophia's classified service record. As the room cleared, Sophia sat alone at the witness table, knowing that the investigation had reached its turning point. She had revealed her identity as Nightwatch, the intelligence operative who had disappeared from official records 5 years ago. Now she would have to explain not just what she had observed at Fort Westbrook, but why she had chosen to leave her intelligence career behind and work in the shadows as a security contractor. The patch on her jacket was no longer a hidden reminder of past commitments. It was now evidence in a case that would determine whether military security prioritized politics or actual protection. Colonel Simmons approached her during the recess, his expression mixing respect and concern. Ms. Reyes, are you sure you want to open up those old files? Some things are better left classified. Sophia looked out the window at the base perimeter where security patrols were conducting their rounds. Colonel, 5 years ago, I learned that staying silent to protect yourself doesn't protect anyone else. I won't make that mistake again. She touched her patch, feeling the worn fabric that had traveled with her through covert operations, career changes, and the long journey toward understanding what it really meant to serve. Some stories need to be told, even when they hurt, especially when they might save lives. As the investigation prepared to resume, Sophia knew that she was about to confront not just Blackwell's negligence, but her own past and the decisions that had brought her to this moment. The battle for security at Fort Westbrook was about to become something much more personal and much more important. The classified briefing room adjacent to the main hearing chamber was equipped with secure communication systems and soundproofing that created an almost oppressive silence. Sophia sat across from the 3 investigating officers, her complete intelligence service record spread across the table between them. General Winters spoke first, her voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there during the public testimony. Agent Reyes, your Task Force Sentinel record is extraordinary. 38 counterintelligence operations, including 9 conducted under deep cover with no extraction protocols. Your final mission report makes for sobering reading. Sophia kept her expression neutral, but her hands unconsciously moved to the worn medallion in her pocket. The operation was compromised from the start, ma'am. Intelligence was incomplete, local assets were unreliable, and our cover identities had been flagged by foreign intelligence services before we even arrived. Colonel Reynolds reviewed the mission summary with growing concern. According to this report, you were coordinating with Agent Michael Bennett when his position was compromised by a security breach at headquarters. You maintained your cover and completed the mission despite losing communication with command. Yes, sir, but we lost 3 other operatives in the same operation. Agents David Chen, Sarah Williams, and Thomas Rodriguez never made it out of the country. Major Zhang looked up from the classified document. The investigation concluded that the operation should never have been authorized, given the intelligence gaps and known security vulnerabilities at headquarters. Multiple compromise points were predictable and preventable. Sophia felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt, the burden she had carried for 5 years. That's correct, ma'am. The mission commander ignored intelligence warnings and security readiness concerns because political pressure demanded immediate action. Sound familiar? The parallel to Blackwell's behavior at Fort Westbrook was unmistakable. Both cases involved commanders prioritizing external pressures over security protocols, gambling with lives to meet operational demands. General Winters closed the file and looked directly at Sophia. Agent, you resigned your position immediately after the Task Force Sentinel investigation. Why did you choose to leave intelligence service instead of accepting reassignment? Because I realized that rank and authority weren't enough to prevent the kind of institutional negligence that killed my team members. I thought I could do more good working from the ground up, focusing on the technical details that keep people safe. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I was wrong about that, ma'am. Working without authority means your expertise gets dismissed by people who prioritize politics over security. Sometimes you need rank to make people listen. Colonel Reynolds leaned forward. Are you saying you regret leaving intelligence service? Sophia considered the question for a long moment. I regret that it took another near breach to force people to pay attention to documented security concerns, but I don't regret learning that prevention is more important than heroism. The panel spent another hour reviewing Sophia's technical analysis of the broader security problems at Fort Westbrook. Her documentation revealed a pattern of systematic corner-cutting that went far beyond Blackwell's individual decisions, suggesting institutional pressure from higher command levels to maintain performance statistics regardless of actual security integrity. When they returned to the main hearing chamber, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Word of Sophia's identity had spread through the base, and the gallery was now filled with security personnel and senior officers who understood the significance of having a task force Sentinel operative testifying about security concerns. General Winters called the session to order with enhanced gravity. This investigation has revealed information that extends beyond the immediate allegations against Chief Security Officer Blackwell. We will now hear testimony from additional witnesses regarding security practices and protection protocols at Fort Westbrook Military Base. Lieutenant Miller was the first officer to testify. His detailed account of security anomalies and near breaches, painting a disturbing picture of a facility that was technically compliant but operating at the margins of safety. His testimony was followed by 3 other officers who described similar experiences, each one corroborating Sophia's analysis of systematic security shortcuts. Colonel Simmons provided the most damaging testimony, revealing the pressure that Blackwell had placed on security staff to approve protocols despite documented vulnerabilities. His personal notes showed a pattern of intimidation and retaliation against personnel who raised security concerns. Chief Blackwell made it clear that our performance evaluations would suffer if we flagged too many potential vulnerabilities, Simons testified. He frequently reminded us that security performance statistics were being monitored at the highest levels and that careers depended on maintaining high ratings. Blackwell's defense began to crumble as witness after witness corroborated the allegations against him. His lawyer attempted to argue that he was following orders from higher command to maintain operational efficiency, but the investigation panel wasn't sympathetic to claims that security could be sacrificed for statistics. The turning point came when Jordan Mitchell, the young security analyst who had initially distanced himself from Sophia, requested permission to testify. His nervousness was obvious as he approached the witness table, but his testimony was devastating. I want to apologize to Ms. Reyes, he began, his voice shaking slightly. She tried to teach me proper security assessment procedures, but I ignored her advice because Chief Blackwell told us that civilian contractors didn't understand military requirements. He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket. I've been keeping track of the security vulnerabilities that Ms. Reyes identified, but we were told to ignore. In the past 6 months, she flagged 23 separate issues that later showed signs of exploitation or attempted breaches. Mitchell looked directly at Blackwell. Sir, I realize now that following your orders put this base at risk. Ms. Reyes was trying to protect us, and we were too focused on meeting performance metrics to listen to her. Blackwell's final defense collapsed when General Winters presented evidence that he had been falsifying security reports to meet performance targets. Digital forensics had revealed systematic deletion of vulnerability alerts and modification of assessment findings to show higher security ratings. Chief Blackwell, General Winters, said with cold precision, you deliberately compromised base security to advance your career prospects. Your actions endangered classified research and personnel under your protection, and violated the fundamental trust that military security depends upon. Blackwell stood at attention, his face pale but his military bearing intact. Ma'am, I acknowledge that my decisions may have been flawed, but they were made under extreme pressure to maintain operational efficiency in challenging circumstances. Sophia felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness as she watched Blackwell's career disintegrate. He wasn't an evil person, just someone who had lost sight of what really mattered when faced with institutional pressure and personal ambition. General Winters addressed the full hearing chamber. This investigation has revealed systematic failures in security oversight, threat reporting, and command decision-making that extend beyond any individual officer. Our recommendations will include comprehensive reforms to ensure that technical expertise is properly valued and security concerns are addressed regardless of their source. She turned to Sophia. Agent Reyes, your decision to speak up during the congressional demonstration likely prevented a major intelligence breach. Your technical analysis and documentation will serve as the foundation for new security protocols throughout the command. Sophia stood to respond. Thank you, ma'am. But I want to emphasize that this wasn't about individual heroism. It was about listening to the people who work on these security systems every day and trusting their professional judgment over statistical targets. As the formal investigation concluded, Sophia realized that she had accomplished something more important than exposing Blackwell's negligence. She had forced the military security community to confront the tension between operational pressure and protection integrity. And she had proven that technical expertise deserved respect, regardless of rank or authority. The patch on her jacket no longer represented just her own past experiences. It had become a symbol of the responsibility that came with knowledge and the courage required to speak truth to power when lives depended on it. But Sophia also knew that the real work was just beginning. Changing institutional culture would require more than investigation reports and disciplinary action. It would require constant vigilance from people who understood that in security there was no acceptable margin of error when it came to protecting what matters most. The base commander's office overlooked the perimeter, providing a panoramic view of the installation that represented both the pride and the responsibility of Fort Westbrook Military Base. General Robert Hayes had requested a private meeting with Sophia following the conclusion of the formal investigation, and his expression suggested that the conversation would be both difficult and important. Agent Reyes, he began, using her former title for the first time since her identity had been revealed. I owe you an apology on behalf of this entire command. Your security concerns should have been taken seriously regardless of your contractor status, and the treatment you received from Chief Blackwell was unacceptable. Sophia sat across from the general's desk, her posture reflecting years of intelligence training that civilian clothes couldn't completely disguise. Thank you, sir. But my concern isn't with apologies. It's with making sure this kind of institutional negligence doesn't happen again. General Hayes nodded grimly. The Department of Defense has already begun implementing comprehensive reforms based on your documentation and the investigation findings. Chief Blackwell has been relieved of duty and will face court-martial proceedings for falsifying security reports and endangering base operations. He leaned forward, his expression serious. But I want to discuss your future here at Fort Westbrook. The investigating panel has recommended that you be offered a direct commission to return to active service as a counterintelligence officer. Your technical expertise and operational experience would be invaluable in implementing the new security protocols. Sophia had anticipated this offer, but hearing it officially still caused a complex mix of emotions. 5 years ago, she had left intelligence service, convinced that working from the ground up would be more effective than trying to change institutional culture from within. The investigation had proven both the value and the limitations of that approach. General, I appreciate the offer, but I need to think carefully about where I can be most effective. The problem isn't just individual commanders like Blackwell. It's a culture that values statistics over security and treats technical expertise as subordinate to operational pressure. General Hayes pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. Agent, I want to show you something that might influence your decision. This is Blackwell's complete performance record, including evaluations from his previous commands. Sophia reviewed the documents with growing concern. Blackwell's file showed a consistent pattern of prioritizing operational metrics over security concerns, but it also revealed that his superiors had consistently rewarded this behavior with positive evaluations and promotions. He wasn't an aberration, she said finally. He was responding to institutional incentives that rewarded short-term performance statistics over long-term security culture. Exactly, General Hayes confirmed. And that's why we need people like you in positions of authority. The Department of Defense is establishing a new Security Integrity Division that will have direct oversight of protection operations across multiple installations. They want you to head that division. Sophia set down the file and looked out the window at the base perimeter where security teams were conducting the same patrol procedures that had been compromised under Blackwell's command, but now with enhanced oversight and documentation requirements. "What authority would this position have?" she asked. "Complete authority to flag security concerns based on technical assessment regardless of operational pressure. Direct reporting relationship to the regional commander, bypassing local command structures that might prioritize performance metrics over actual security. And most importantly, the power to implement protection protocols based on expertise rather than administrative convenience." It was everything Sophia had wished for during her months of fighting Blackwell's negligence. But she also understood that authority came with responsibility that extended far beyond her own base. "General, if I accept this position, I need your commitment that security concerns will be addressed based on technical merit, not political considerations. I've seen what happens when operational pressure overrides professional judgment." General Hayes stood and extended his hand. "Agent, you have my word that security integrity will be our highest priority and that your technical expertise will be valued and supported at every level of command." 3 weeks later, Sophia stood in the same conference room where the investigation had taken place, but now she was wearing the uniform of a major in the United States Military Intelligence Corps. The ceremony recommissioning her to active service was attended by many of the same people who had testified during the investigation, including Lieutenant Miller, Colonel Simmons, and even Jordan Mitchell. Senator Porter, who had observed the entire investigation process, delivered remarks emphasizing the importance of technical expertise in security decision-making. "Major Reyes has demonstrated that the most important qualification for ensuring protection isn't rank or seniority, but the courage to speak up when you know something is wrong." Blackwell was notably absent from the ceremony. His court-martial had resulted in dismissal from service and forfeiture of retirement benefits, sending a clear message throughout the command that falsifying security reports would not be tolerated. Sophia's first act as head of the Security Integrity Division was to establish new protocols requiring independent technical review of all protection decisions. Contractors and junior officers were given direct access to security reporting systems that bypassed local command structures, ensuring that concerns like hers would never again be buried by officers more concerned with statistics than actual safety. She also instituted regular training programs focusing on the human factors aspects of security, emphasizing the importance of trusting professional intuition even when automated systems suggested normal operation. The curriculum included case studies from her own experience, including the Task Force Sentinel operation that had taught her the ultimate cost of ignoring security warnings. 6 months after taking her new position, Sophia received a letter that brought the story full circle. It was from Lieutenant Miller, who had been selected for advanced security training at the Elite Counterintelligence Academy. "Major Reyes," the letter read, "I wanted you to know that the lessons you taught me about trusting professional judgment over automated systems likely prevented a major security breach last week. During a field exercise testing new intrusion detection systems, I noticed patterns similar to what happened during the congressional demonstration. Instead of relying on the security automation, I followed your advice about watching for human behavioral indicators and manual verification to identify the infiltration team." He continued, "The exercise evaluation revealed systematic vulnerabilities in the new detection package that would have created multiple blind spots if we hadn't identified them early. Your emphasis on human factors training and technical intuition prevented what could have been a catastrophic failure of an entire security system." Sophia smiled as she read the letter, understanding that this was exactly the kind of outcome that made all the personal and professional risks worthwhile. She wasn't just preventing individual breaches. She was changing the culture of military security to value technical expertise and professional judgment over blind adherence to statistics and procedures. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Colonel Simons knocked on her office door late one afternoon carrying a small package wrapped in military-issued paper. "Ma'am," he said with unusual formality, "the security personnel wanted to present you with something to recognize your service to base protection." Inside the package was a custom-made patch similar to her Task Force Sentinel insignia but updated to reflect her new role. The design featured a silver falcon perched on a shield with blue lightning bolts, and the inscription, "Vigilance First, Always." "The design represents your transition from intelligence operative to security analyst to protection officer," Simmons explained. "But the commitment to keeping people safe remains the same." Sophia felt tears forming in her eyes as she examined the patch. It represented not just her own journey, but the recognition that technical expertise and security advocacy were valued and respected by the people who worked on base protection every day. "Colonel," she said quietly, "this is the highest honor I've ever received." "Thank you." As Simmons left her office, Sophia looked out at the base perimeter where security teams were conducting their patrols. The same activities that had once been compromised by Blackwell's negligence were now conducted with enhanced protocols and genuine respect for technical expertise. She had learned that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought in the shadows of covert operations, but in conference rooms and security centers, where decisions were made about what constituted acceptable risk. And sometimes the most meaningful victories weren't dramatic interdictions, but quiet changes in institutional culture that ensured future generations of security personnel would have the support they needed to complete their mission effectively. The patch on her uniform had evolved from a reminder of past loss to a symbol of ongoing commitment, but the essential message remained the same. In security, everyone has a responsibility to protect what matters. And that responsibility extends far beyond formal authority to include everyone who touches a security protocol throughout its implementation. 2 years after the investigation that changed everything, Sophia stood on the observation deck of the new security training center at Fort Westbrook, watching the sunrise paint the base perimeter in shades of gold and amber. The facility had been built with funding secured by Senator Porter, who had become a powerful advocate for technical expertise in military decision-making. Below her, security teams were conducting training exercises with procedures that bore little resemblance to the corner-cutting culture that had nearly cost the base a major intelligence breach. Each assessment was thorough, each security concern was documented and addressed, and each security officer understood that their professional judgment was valued and supported by command. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. Changing institutional culture required constant vigilance and the willingness to challenge assumptions that had been accepted for decades. But the results spoke for themselves. Security integrity ratings had actually improved as protection became more thorough and proactive, and public confidence in military security had reached levels not seen since before several high-profile breaches years earlier. Sophia's office in the training center was filled with documentation that would have seemed impossible during Blackwell's tenure. Security assessments that recorded even minor anomalies, analysis reports that tracked intrusion attempt patterns across multiple installations, and training materials that emphasized the importance of human intuition as a supplement to automated systems. But the most important changes weren't visible in documentation or procedures. They were reflected in the attitudes and behaviors of the people who worked on security every day. Analysts like Jordan Mitchell had become confident advocates for integrity, speaking up about concerns without fear of retaliation. Senior officers like Colonel Simmons had been empowered to challenge commanders who tried to pressure them into approving questionable protocols. A knock on her office door interrupted her morning reflection. Lieutenant Miller entered, now wearing the insignia of a counterintelligence instructor and carrying news that would validate everything Sophia had worked to achieve. "Major Reyes," he said with obvious excitement, "I wanted to share the results of the investigation into that intrusion detection failure I wrote to you about last year." He handed her a classified report that detailed systematic problems with next-generation security systems, problems that had been identified early because of the human factors training and technical intuition protocols Sophia had implemented. "The manufacturer had to recall and redesign the entire system," Miller continued. "The failure modes we identified could have compromised multiple installation types. Your emphasis on trusting professional judgment over automated systems literally prevented dozens of potential breaches." Sophia reviewed the report with satisfaction mixed with soberness. The investigation had revealed that the security system failures were similar to the problems she had identified at Fort Westbrook, suggesting that institutional pressure to ignore security concerns was more widespread than anyone had realized. "Lieutenant, this validates everything we've been trying to teach about the importance of technical expertise in security decisions, but it also shows how much work we still have to do across the entire protection community." Miller nodded. "That's actually why I'm here, ma'am. The Counterintelligence Academy has asked me to develop a curriculum on human factors and security testing based on the protocols you've established here. They want to ensure that future security officers understand the importance of working with technical personnel as partners in protection." The request represented a fundamental shift in military security culture, acknowledging that protection was a collaborative effort rather than the exclusive domain of commanders and policymakers. Sophia felt pride in knowing that the lessons learned at Fort Westbrook were being applied to prevent future breaches across the entire security community. Later that afternoon, Sophia received an unexpected visitor. Jordan Mitchell, now a senior analyst with his own team of security personnel, came to her office carrying a worn notebook and wearing an expression of quiet determination. "Ma'am," he said, "I wanted to thank you for teaching me that speaking up about security concerns isn't insubordination. It's professionalism." He opened the notebook to reveal detailed documentation of vulnerabilities across multiple security systems, analysis that would have been dismissed as paranoia during Blackwell's tenure, but was now recognized as valuable protection intelligence. "I've identified potential problems with biometric verification systems on the new access points," Mitchell continued. "The patterns are similar to what you documented with the credential vulnerabilities, and I think we need to investigate before they create exploitable weaknesses." Sophia smiled as she reviewed Mitchell's analysis, seeing the same attention to detail and pattern recognition that had once made her own concerns seem overly cautious to people who didn't understand the stakes involved. "Excellent work, Jordan. Let's get this information to the system designers immediately and coordinate with other bases to see if they've observed similar vulnerabilities." As Mitchell left her office, Sophia reflected on the transformation that had taken place not just in institutional procedures, but in the confidence and competence of individual security personnel. They were no longer simply following protocols and meeting statistical targets. They were actively engaged in preventing breaches through careful observation and professional judgment. The evening brought a ceremony that would mark the culmination of Sophia's journey from dismissed contractor to respected security advocate. The Department of Defense was presenting her with the Distinguished Intelligence Service Medal for her role in preventing multiple security breaches through innovative protection protocols and courageous advocacy. But the award ceremony also included recognition for the many people who had supported her efforts to change institutional culture. Colonel Simmons received the Meritorious Service Medal for his documentation of security concerns under difficult circumstances. Lieutenant Miller was honored for his willingness to testify about system vulnerabilities despite potential career risks. Even Jordan Mitchell received recognition for his transformation from reluctant follower to confident security advocate. Senator Porter delivered the keynote address, emphasizing the broader implications of the Fort Westbrook investigation for military decision-making across all services. Major Reyes has demonstrated that technical expertise and professional courage are force multipliers that enhance our security capability far beyond what traditional metrics can measure, he said. But more importantly, she has shown that institutional culture can be changed when individuals are willing to risk personal comfort for the greater good. The security protocols developed here at Fort Westbrook are now being implemented across hundreds of installations, potentially preventing thousands of breaches and protecting countless sensitive operations. As Sophia accepted her award, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 5 years ago, she had been night watch, an operative whose team had been destroyed by institutional negligence and political pressure. The loss of agents Chen, Williams, and Rodriguez had taught her that individual heroism wasn't enough to prevent systematic failures. But her experience as a dismissed security contractor had taught her something equally important: that changing institutions required patience, documentation, and the willingness to fight battles that might seem small, but had enormous consequences for the people who depended on those institutions. In her acceptance speech, Sophia emphasized that the real victory wasn't her own vindication, but the cultural transformation that had made Fort Westbrook a model for technical excellence and security advocacy. 5 years ago, I learned that silence in the face of institutional negligence is complicity in the consequences that follow, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed auditorium. Today I'm proud to work in an environment where technical expertise is valued, security concerns are addressed promptly, and every person who touches a protection protocol understands their responsibility to safeguard what matters most. She paused, touching the patch on her uniform that had evolved from a reminder of loss to a symbol of ongoing commitment. The patch I wear represents more than my own service or experience. It represents the promise that we make to each other every day that we will use our knowledge and judgment to prevent the kind of breaches that compromise our national security and diminish our capability to protect our nation. As the ceremony concluded and people began filing out of the auditorium, Sophia was approached by a young security analyst she didn't recognize. The woman was wearing the uniform of a junior officer assigned to a different base, and her nervous expression suggested she had something important to say. "Ma'am," the analyst said quietly, I wanted to thank you for making it possible for people like me to speak up about security concerns. I'm working at a different installation, but I've been following the protocols you developed here. She pulled out a small notebook similar to the ones Mitchell and Simmons had shown Sophia. I have documented some potential problems with perimeter detection calibration that might be creating blind spots. My supervisors haven't been receptive to my concerns, but I know that you've proven these issues need to be taken seriously. Sophia felt a familiar combination of pride and concern as she reviewed the analyst's documentation. The analysis was thorough and professional, suggesting genuine security vulnerabilities that deserved immediate attention, but she also recognized the position the young woman was in, facing institutional resistance, similar to what Sophia had encountered with Blackwell. "What's your name?" Sophia asked. "Lieutenant Rebecca Turner, ma'am. I've been working in security analysis for 3 years, but this is the first time I felt confident enough to document concerns that my supervisors might not want to hear." Sophia smiled, understanding that her efforts to change institutional culture were having effects far beyond Fort Westbrook. "Lieutenant Turner, your documentation looks excellent, and your concerns appear to be well-founded. Would you be willing to coordinate with our security center to investigate these issues and share the results with other installations?" The relief on Turner's face was obvious. "Yes, ma'am. I just want to make sure these vulnerabilities are addressed before they create actual breaches." As Sophia walked back to her quarters that evening, she reflected on the conversation with Lieutenant Turner and its implications for the future of security integrity. The cultural changes that had begun with her confrontation with Blackwell were spreading throughout the military protection community, empowering technical personnel to advocate for security without fear of retaliation. But she also understood that institutional change was an ongoing process, not a one-time victory. There would always be commanders who prioritized statistics over security, always pressure to cut corners when resources were limited, always temptation to ignore problems that seemed manageable in the short term. The patch on her uniform had evolved through multiple meanings over the years. As Night Watch, it had represented her identity as an intelligence operative. As a dismissed contractor, it had been a hidden reminder of past commitments. During the investigation, it had become evidence of her credibility and experience. Now, as head of the Security Integrity Division, the patch represented something more comprehensive. The understanding that security was everyone's responsibility, that technical expertise deserved respect regardless of rank or position, and that preventing breaches required constant vigilance from people who understood that the smallest details could have the largest consequences. Sophia pulled out her worn medallion and read the inscription that had guided her through the most difficult decisions of her career. "In shadows, still serve." The phrase had originally referred to her ability to operate covertly in hostile environments, but she had learned that it applied equally to the challenge of maintaining professional integrity in institutional environments that didn't always value technical expertise. Sometimes protecting what matters meant being willing to operate in unfamiliar territory, to take career risks that seemed irrational to people who didn't understand the stakes involved. Sometimes it meant speaking up when silence would be easier, documenting problems that others preferred to ignore, and fighting battles that seemed small but had enormous consequences for the people who depended on security systems. Sophia had learned that the most important operations weren't always the ones you conducted yourself. Sometimes they were the ones you made possible for others by ensuring that their security protocols were sound, their procedures were effective, and their concerns were heard by people with the authority to act. As she reached her quarters, Sophia looked up at the stars that had once been the backdrop for her covert operations. She no longer worked in deep cover, but she had found something more meaningful than individual heroism: the satisfaction of knowing that her work made it possible for others to operate safely in an increasingly dangerous world. The young security analyst who had approached her that evening reminded Sophia that the battle for security integrity was far from over. There were still commanders like Blackwell at other installations, still institutional pressures that prioritized statistics over security, still technical personnel who were afraid to speak up about concerns that could save lives. But there were also people like Lieutenant Turner, Lieutenant Miller, Colonel Simmons, and Jordan Mitchell who understood that security was everyone's responsibility. They were the next generation of protection professionals who would carry forward the lessons learned at Fort Westbrook, ensuring that technical expertise was valued and security concerns were addressed regardless of their source. And for people like Lieutenant Miller to trust their professional judgment even when automated systems suggested everything was normal. The patch on Sophia's uniform would always carry the weight of past loss and the responsibility of ongoing commitment. But it also represented hope, the understanding that individual courage could change institutional culture, that technical expertise could prevent tragedies, and that the most important security operations happened in plain sight, where careful attention to detail and willingness to speak up about problems could mean the difference between protection and catastrophic failure. As Sophia prepared for sleep, she thought about the guidance she would provide to Lieutenant Turner the next morning, offering support and direction for documenting her concerns about perimeter detection calibration. She thought about the training programs she would develop to help technical personnel at other installations recognize and report security vulnerabilities. She thought about the ongoing work of changing military protection culture, one conversation and one documented concern at a time. 5 years ago, she had been Night Watch, an operative whose world had been shattered by institutional negligence and political pressure. Now she was Major Sophia Reyes, head of the Security Integrity Division, someone whose quiet persistence and technical expertise had prevented countless breaches and protected untold numbers of operations. The journey from dismissed contractor to respected security advocate had taught her that heroism wasn't always dramatic or immediately recognized. Sometimes it was as simple as paying attention to details that others overlooked, speaking up when something didn't seem right, and refusing to accept that breaches were inevitable when they were actually preventable. The medallion in her pocket bore the inscription, "In shadows, still serve." But Sophia had learned that the most important service wasn't the kind you performed in darkness. It was the kind you made possible for others by ensuring that they never had to operate without proper protection in the first place. Her patch told a story of loss and redemption, of individual courage and institutional change, of the understanding that safeguarding what matters was everyone's responsibility and everyone's honor. It was a story that would continue as long as people were willing to trust their professional judgment, document their concerns, and speak up when something didn't seem right. The base was quiet now, facilities secured for the night and ready for tomorrow's operations. But Sophia knew that somewhere a security analyst was conducting one final check, catching a vulnerability that might have caused a breach. Somewhere, a young officer was studying intrusion patterns and system performance, learning to trust professional intuition as much as automated detection. Somewhere, a commander was listening to security concerns from technical personnel and taking action to address them. The shadows would never disappear completely as long as threats existed. But people like Sophia Reyes, once Night Watch, now guardian of security integrity, would continue to serve within them, guiding others through whatever darkness they might encounter. Her story had become their story, and their commitment to protection had become her legacy. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the base was asleep and the stars were brightest, Sophia understood that she had found something more important than individual glory. The satisfaction of knowing that her work made it possible for others to serve effectively and return safely to the people who loved them. The patch on her uniform would always remind her of the team members who didn't make it home. But it also represented the countless operations that would succeed, because someone had been willing to speak up about an irregular access pattern, a miscalibrated sensor, or an unusual behavioral anomaly that didn't seem quite right. That was the real meaning of "In shadows, still serve." It wasn't about individual heroism in impossible circumstances. It was about creating the conditions where everyone could serve effectively with the protection they deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.